here today with IAMPETH Master Penman, John DeCollibus. And John, welcome and thank you for agreeing to speak with me today for the IAMPETH members. Thank you. I'm going to start right off with how you first became interested in the pen arts in general. When did that happen? How did it happen?
I've been interested in penmanship since first grade.
Okay.
I was the only lefty in my class, and everyone was able to handle a pen better than I. And we had a dip pen at that time. That was in 1953, I think. Right. So I just couldn't do it at all, and I envied them. And then I would watch other people write with pencils, the other students, and they were all better than I was. So that just stuck in my head. You know, going through school, I just was always concerned with my penmanship.
So as a left-handed person, even as a boy, you felt you were behind the eight ball, so to speak.
Right.
Plus being left-handed.
I did, and I did. I mean, nobody tried to change me, so I just went along with it.
Did they teach penmanship in school?
They did, more than they do today. They did put the letters up on the board, and we had to trace them.
Was there any attempt to help you as a lefty? Was there any attempt to, because there were some schools of thought where you switch the person from left to right-handed. Was there any attempt to do that with you or help you as a left-handed person?
No one ever tried to do that. And, I did get better, like third and fourth grade. You know, I started to pick up, but I was never as good as everybody else. It seemed I had to really go slow and struggle with it.
Mm-hmm. So when did you first develop an interest in actual, calligraphic arts?
That started in about 1973. I was always, even from, as I said, from a kid, when I wrote a letter to somebody on the envelope or the letter, I always tried to make it look more exciting. And once I sent a thank you card to a cousin of mine, Steve DeCollibus, and I saw him a few days later, and he had the envelope, and he said to me these words. He said, "You're a calligrapher," and I had no idea what it was. He explained it to me, and he said, "Next time I see you, I'm going to bring you in a pen that I got at art school." He went to an art school of design, but he had no desire to pursue that at all. He had no interest in it. He gave it to me, and with got thicks and thins by direction, movement with italics. I picked up a few books in art stores and started practicing with it, not really knowing what I was doing. And one of the books I picked up was Tommy Thompson's script letter book. Sure. And I was thrilled with that. The whole idea of script was so amazing. And I was trying to do it, though, with that. I didn't realize that there was a special pen for that. So my thin lines weren't that thin. But I was getting a basic idea. But it was looking good. I was showing people.
So at what point did you develop, a specific interest? I mean, I think most people watching this are aware of your skill with the pointed pen. Mm-hmm. When did you first develop an interest in pointed pen work? And when you first got into that, how were you sort of approaching it as a lefty? So when did it first happen? Your interest in that? And did you find any real obstacles when you first got into it as a lefty?
Well, I made adjustments to how I address the paper with the pen. Initially with the Osmoid pen that I had.
So you were doing pointed pen work with an Osmoid?
With an Osmoid.
But when did you first, actually specifically pointed pen, when did that occur? Was it back in the 70s?
It occurred when I read in another book that my cousin gave me, the same cousin, Steve, gave me this book. There was something about the history of writing or something by Alexander Nesbitt. And in it, I was reading a sentence, reading along, I saw the exemplars, they were beautiful. And then I read somewhere where it said, "the flexible steel point." And then I said, what does that mean? I don't know what that means. I went to an art supply store in Framingham, Mass, and I asked them, and they directed me to it. And I took it home, and I used show card black ink, which was a speedball at the time. And suddenly I said, "Oh, this is it." And I wish I still had the Osmoid pen, but I set it aside. I realized that's not what you use. That's when I first discovered it was that. I don't remember what pen it was, but I think it was a Hunt 101. But it was very flexible, and it was just a total revelation.
So John, you started this, at the time you started this, were you aware of the incredible history of the golden age of penmanship in this country?
No.
Okay.
My first go ahead.
When was your first exposure?
My first exposure was I took at a museum school in Danforth Museum in Framingham. I took a course with Mark Vachon, who taught me. It was basically broad pen. It was italics and Roman. But during the class, I was fooling around with the pointing pen. I wasn't paying attention. I was in the back of the room. He came by and he saw what I was doing, and he said, "You know, I've got something for you." And next class, he came in and he had photocopied the first 20 or so pages of the Zenarian manual. That was the first time I saw it ever in my life. And I think it was probably the biggest step towards getting to know what this really was about, because as you know very well, it broke down how to construct it, how to square up tops and stuff. I took that and then I was off. I just literally practiced all day.
Yeah, I mean, for me, no person or book ever had as big an impact as the Zenarian manual had on me. That was, but knowing how to get to be able to write that stuff is critical for me. So now you said you had already made adjustments for your left-handedness, so it wasn't like you had some real trauma going into this where.
Right. I never had seen an oblique pen holder, except the drawings that were in the magazine. But knowing that I'm left-handed, I figured I'll use the straight holder. That must be something which is right easy. So I used a straight holder, and I held the paper virtually upside down and constructed my letters away from myself. That's just the way it worked.
And for those of our membership that may not know this, and those watching this video clip, you know, when the old masters of the past used to flourish letters, the stroke was always being thrown away from you. What that means is the heavy shade was produced by taking the pen away from your body and pressing like this. Because of the way most modern penmen write, they tend to pull the stroke, which means the shade is formed coming towards you. If you look at any of the old instructional manuals, they hold the pen vertically, the way John can do, and throw the strokes. This is the way he was writing. But most of us, when we write this style, we base it on any type of engrosser script, engraver script. We basically pull our strokes towards ourselves to form the letters. What John actually throws them, he's writing upside down, right?
Not quite, but it looked that way.
Yeah, it does look that way. Even with all my experience, I still have trouble describing it to people. John, did you have any mentors over the course of it? Maybe not initially, because it sounds like you're initially self-taught for many years. Who would you look at as mentors during your formative years in doing this before you achieved whatever level of proficiency you have now?
Well, I really, I forget what, it was probably in 1993, and I had been doing this for a while. I had already penned the Declaration of Independence and things like that, using the straight holder. But I really didn't know of these other people that much, except for the few pages of the Zenarian manual. It's when I got in touch with IAMPETH, which was in 1993, and it happened because a lady had given me a whole box of pen points, old ones, and I had no, and I was trying them, and then I came to one, and I tried that one, and it was like unbelievable.
You remember what the point was?
A 604.
Okay.
A 604, and so I was on a quest. There were probably 3 or 4 of them in this batch, and the rest were mostly radio pens and all that stuff, and I realized that's not what this was. So I forget now exactly the details, but I actually had an older second uncle, my wife's uncle, Buster.
Just a name removed relative.
Yeah, this was relative. And he came over to the house once, was visiting, and he talked about Tamblin. He knew about penmanship. He didn't really do it that well himself. At least I didn't see all those.
Did he take a Tamblin correspondence course?
I think he may have done that. Okay. Anyway, through a process of many phone calls, I got in touch with Ziller of Kansas City.
Stephen Ziller? Zenarian graduate?
Exactly. So he would have been the first penman that I would have actually spoken to. When he corresponded with me, he would send me letters that were just amazing, because I didn't know anything. I was doing copperplate at the time from the Zenarian, the engravers, and he was doing all this fancy stuff, the ornamental, which I always had trouble with. It wasn't until several years later I found out why. It was mostly for me the tools. anyway, back and forth with him, that was very good. And then finally I met Kathy Saunders. I think it was Ziller put me in touch with IAMPETH somehow. I really forget the details. But with Kathy Saunders, and then she told me about IAMPETH. And that was the first time I realized that there were actually other people that had a passion at this point in time. I never knew that before. And when I went to the first convention, and that was just the eye opener.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said for myself, that's had, second to this Nary manual is probably the biggest impact on me. So had that kind of profound impact on you.
Oh yeah.
From our standpoint.
Absolutely.
When we talk about the past masters, we mentioned, when we first became aware of these folks like Zilla were around. Is there one master who you admire most? Maybe more than one, but if you could pick one or two, who would you put at the top of your list?
Well, it would be Louis Mataraz.
Right, the great Mataraz.
Great Mataraz.
Why would you put Mataraz at the top? I mean, I agree with you.
Yeah.
But what is it about Mataraz? We've spoken about this at length, but our audience may not be aware of it. What is it about Mataraz? We can even coin it.
Well, it was I'm a perfectionist. Things that I decide to do something, I usually go all out at it, like yourself. And it was the precision, but then the personality, the flair that he put on. And there were others that were great at it, but I think seems like they all were following his lead on that. So that's what it was. It was just this, I guess, dash is what you call it. Just the lines, the curves were perfect. So that drew me to it, but there were others.
Yeah, I mean, we've often speculated about what his role was in sort of development or the formation of Spencerian was there before he came along, but he seems to have been present at a point in time where Spencerian made this transition to this more artistic form, something that almost leaves the realm of handwriting and approaches the realm of art. No, Spencerian's art, but I mean, less handwriting and more, not necessarily drawing the letter, but something that approaches a more refined art form. And, we believe folks like Mataraz and E.B. Taylor were part of that sort of evolution. And certainly before him, there was some fancy work being done, but nothing as dramatic. I mean, his contrast of shades and hairlines is just absolutely amazing. Is there anybody else you want to put into that level?
Well, I put many of them, I grew up at Zahner, and I love for people that I've admired.
John, I'm going to take a break right now, and when we come back, we'll discuss some more about IAMPETH, in particular, a little bit more about your specifics about your left-handedness and how you were able to work that through your penmanship. We'll be right back. Welcome back. John, I'd like to go back to this left-handed issue. The reason why I keep coming back to this is because for left-handers, this is a really big deal. I mean, I can, with my instructional material online, I can get them, the right-handed person, instruction on how to get the pen holder adjusted correctly. I don't have really much to offer them from a left-hander because I don't, in my head, I just can't see it or don't know how to sort of approach giving them suggestions. Letter forms are letter forms, but how you form them if you're left-handed. So the first question I have for you, or the comment I have, is that in IAMPETH we have, it's interesting because the first year of induction of Master Penman, we inducted 3 left-handed calligraphers and penmen. And so there are people who come in, actually, and you've probably heard them, they're left-handed, they don't think they can do this or go to the high level. So I always remind left-handers that, 3 of our initial masters are left-handers, and I've said this about John before, I think he's the finest pointed pen artist in the world for this kind of script, and he happens to be left-handed. So take someone like Rick Muffler, White House calligrapher and IAMPETH member, past president. Rick is a left-hander, but Rick writes with a reversed oblique pen holder. Debbie Zahner, a left-handed calligrapher, very, she does lots of wedding work, and Debbie writes with a straight pen holder. Then you have Rosemary Buchek, who writes with it's hard to describe the bend on her metal flange. She writes with an oblique pen holder, but the flange is custom designed for her hand. You, on the other hand, write with a right-handed person's oblique pen holder. So just in the span of 4 people, it can be very, very confusing. So why did you elect to, did you ever write with a straight pen holder? Do you write with a hook? What's the difference between a hook and straight-handed for those people who may not be aware of this?
For about 16 or 17 years, the time I started, I wrote with a straight pen holder. And it's easy to do as a lefty. Actually, I can still do it. It still works. About in 1998 or so, at a convention, I was watching Mike Sull demonstrate some flourishing. And I thought to myself, I said, there seems to be a restriction in movement with a straight pen holder. It would be better because when I rotate my wrist, the pen point would flow better. It was just a thought. Anyway, when I got home, I started working, playing around with it. And at the time, I was in communication with Bill Lilly, and Bill sent me several oblique pen holders, right-handed oblique pen holders, and they're actually the ones I use today. And it was next to seeing this scenario manual for the first time. This was great because now I could.
So it made that big a functional difference to you for writing.
Yeah.
So the initial idea was, the initial reason for doing it was because it seemed like a good thing to do. It wasn't a functional thing. You go watch Mike. And then when you finally tried it, it wasn't like, I have to get used to this. It was sort of like jumping into a warm water for you. It was comfortable. So it was like the Harry Potter wand, right? Hits the right wand, you know it. So that's the reason why you did that. And when you look at the work you do between script and flourishing, right, that kind of work, was the original reasoning for doing it, what I was picking up from you when you were talking was that the reason for wanting to try is to maybe facilitate flourishing better.
Exactly.
So you have no real difference in writing the letter. It's that flourishing, the ability to throw those strokes the way you do, that was the real impetus for doing it.
Right. With a straight holder, I was sort of limited to a certain range, but if I wanted to throw one out really to the side, it can be done, but it means really laying my hand down very flat, just as flourishing is done traditionally with a straight holder, throwing the stroke like that, and the pen would dig in. But when I can bend the flange and curve, it just opened up special caps. It didn't, the lower case could be done either way.
The interesting thing about what you're saying is in contrast to the right-handed approach, the historical right-handed approach of flourishing, because in truth, the oblique pen holder for a right-handed penman limits their flourishing ability. It's the straight pen holder that gives them the extra movement to be able to throw the stroke, but because you're lefty, you found just the opposite. Okay, great. That's an important thing to know.
Yeah.
And for any left-handed members, John can always be contacted through his website, beyondwords.com, right, John?
It's Beyond Words Script.
Beyondwordscript.com. Thank you. And he's always willing to help out and make suggestions. But I think from this small conversation we're having, I think you can understand that there's not one single rule. If your hands in this position, use a straight. Your hands in this position, use something else. Although you could potentially say if you write with a hook, you need to have an oblique pen holder. Would that be a true statement for a left-hander?
If you write with a hook, you need a left oblique.
So instead of going this way, you write like this.
You're writing like that, but you're writing in this way instead of away from it.
Okay. All right. What advice would you give to any struggling would-be penman who's left-handed? Let's say they come across this video, they see it. Is there something they can try? Would you first suggest determining how they write? Should they contact somebody initially, or
call me? That's what they should do.
No,
I will. I may be also slow at responding to emails sometimes because they kind of do that. But
just be
persistent. And I'll eventually I'll get it. But I've taught many lefties in my life. It's no more difficult, it's no easier to teach them than it is a right-handed person. For me, you would think it would be. If they come in writing with a hook, it's difficult to change. I've told the story. It's on my website. I used to write with a hook all through school up until about the 10th grade in high school. But I saw these other people with wonderful handwriting, and they all wrote under. They all wrote the way I do now. So about that time, I just said, that's it. I am going to write like that. I don't like writing like this. The hand got in the way of the spiral binding of the book. It just didn't seem natural. So I practiced that. And in the 11th grade, I had a wonderful English teacher, Mr. Holloman, and he would make us do a 500-word report every single weekend. We had 3-day weekends there. And I would submit my papers, and then finally, at about the third one, he just put a note on my page with red ink. I still have it. And it said, I'm no longer going to accept your handwriting. It's just illegible. And he says, if you have respect for people, he's kind of paraphrasing his words, you will not write like this. And I want things either typed or I want them printed, which I had to do. I didn't print anything, I didn't type. You can't. But it is ironic because I have that letter from him framed next to my Master Penman certificate. It's like a compensation one. But I knew that I wanted to do that. Eventually it got better, although I confess that my handwriting, regular handwriting with ballpoint pen today is just not good. And
this is something I think some novices to this form of art, especially the pointed pen form of art, they make the assumption that if you have a high level of skill in script writing, whether it's Spencerian script or ornamental script, Spencerian is actually a form of handwriting, whereas in grocer script or engraver script, the way I do it, and John would do it, it's not handwriting, it's drawing of letters. So it's literally say that it's the equivalent of engraving on paper. And but it is interesting. It is very interesting to at least note that people tend to think they make the assumption. They'll look at your Master Penman certificate and they'll say, "Well, John's got beautiful handwriting," and it's not really handwriting. My handwriting is not great. It's almost embarrassing to say that. But when you speak to Mike Soule, Mike Soule, what he does is handwriting. Spencerian script is handwriting. He's come out with a new book on handwriting. So Mike actually has beautiful handwriting. But just because somebody can write beautiful script doesn't mean they can take a ballpoint pen and write you a letter that's going to look like beautiful handwriting. So there's two distinctions there. I'd like to take another break real quick, and then we'll come back, and then I want to speak to you about your time in IAMPETH and how you see the changes of IAMPETH over the years. And we'll be right back. Thank you. Welcome back. Okay, John, I'd like to move this topic now to our organization, the International Association of Master Penmen Engrossers and Teachers of Handwriting, or IAMPETH, as most people know it, short. Hopefully, if you're looking at this, you're well aware of our website. It has an incredible amount of instructional material and artwork on it, free for the general public to look at. John, when did you first become aware of IAMPETH?
Well, it was in '93. Contacting different people to find out more about the 604 endpoint.
The July 604.
July 604. I got in touch with, finally got down to Kathy Saunders through Ziller. And, she explained what IAMPETH was all about. And she was very excited about the fact that I was interested in know about the organization. So the following year, which was in 1994 at Williamsburg, Virginia, my first convention, and it was very exciting because when I came in to one of the classes, nobody knew me, of course, but Kathy introduced me to a lot of people, and the next day was the day of classes, and so I sat down in the class, and I was just blown away by all these people with pointed pens because it was totally strange because I was. I had all the instructors where I was totally cranking in. They were all teaching italics and button. Anyway, at in the back of the room, there was some exemplars set up, and one of them that drew my eye particularly was Bill Lilly. at the time, I was still using a straight pen holder. And any flourish that I did was just a very little tiny little curl because I really didn't have the freedom to move it. I was introduced to Bill, and Bill was gracious enough to be went up to his room. He was showing me things that, pens explaining stuff about his area and everything. But I was noticing these huge flourishes, and I was just so impressed with how that changes everything when you throw these flourishes on. So I still had trouble doing it because I didn't realize it was because of the straight pen holder at the time. Although again, as you mentioned, flourishing is usually done with the straight pen holder. The right hand and the left hand can use it too. But in the lettering, combination of lettering and flourishing, it just doesn't work for me. Anyway, from that convention, time went by. I was meeting all different people, Buddy Blackwell, and I grew the most in those years. And because finally I wasn't just learning on my own, I had people to go to. And although there weren't many left-handers, and I had a foundation. I had already written the Declaration of Independence and the Bill of Rights.
Which, by the way, is on the IAMPETH website under the artwork section.
Right. So, I've actually forgotten what the original question was.
How you got interested in that, and how you became aware of IAMPETH. You're talking about the impact it had when you went to UC and I did want to follow up on something, and this diverts from the topic of IAMPETH for a second. You mentioned you didn't possess this flourishing ability when you went to IAMPETH, so you weren't born with the ability to flourish these large strokes and the muscular and whole arm movement, because you're one of the few people around who actually possess the muscular and whole arm movement, and you do it very accurately. So how did you develop that? You weren't born with it. How do you do it?
I attribute it mostly to the fact that I push strokes away from me when I write.
Okay.
So naturally, if I'm making a capital T or something, I'm going to push that stroke and go like this. Well, once I've made that curve, I really have just made a flourish. So it's very easy for me now to just keep adding and doing it that way. So
how did you practice? Were you practicing with ink? Were you practicing with pencil on paper?
I practiced right with the pen points that I had, and I did at the time have some 604s, and I forget that I had a lot of actually 356s. Is that the small?
Yeah, the small.
That's actually the one I did the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights.
Okay. That tiny, nice fine hairline.
Right, but it's not good for
But John, so you said this ability to push. Well, I guess what I'm getting at is, were you able to do these fancy, uniform, obey the rules kind of flourishing right from the beginning? Or did you have to develop that skill?
No, really, a lot of that came a little afterwards when I got, like, for example, the ornamental, the
ornate pictorial calligraphy off from Lutfer?
When I began seeing certain samples of Mataraz's work, when I saw, and of course, some of those exemplars were in Mike Sells Volume 1, Volume 2, ornamental penmanship back in the 90s. And I just figured that is something that's a whole different ballgame, because I couldn't come close to those fine hairlines and those heavy shades. I tried, I couldn't. So I wanted to go more with a script that had some flourish to it, which would be probably an ornamental script. And it wasn't really until, I think we're on a decade here, wait a minute, let's see. Well, I began doing, after about a few years at IAMPETH is when I really started thinking in terms of doing more flourishing and doing, bird flourishing and that type of thing. I tend to prefer the flourishing that's spontaneous,
right,
as opposed to the ones that are like, the Zaner, that bird over there wasn't just thrown off, that was carefully constructed. I don't have the patience for that type of thing. I like the quick stuff. And of course, it looks like Mataraz did too, because any flourishing I've seen of his,
spontaneous.
It was quick stuff, maybe 20 strokes.
Well, I guess the question I'm really trying to get at, the novice doing this, the moment you tried to do it, were you as good as you are now at it? Was it a natural thing for you, or did you have to work on the symmetry of curves, knowing how to do it?
Well, the actual making the actual stroke and getting that
right,
curve, that came fairly quickly.
Okay.
combining strokes and learning that you don't do this, you don't cross too heavy shades, and figuring out how things should be, composed. That took some time. And sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But I still like it when you just sit down and you don't have a plan, and you just sit down and things happen. And those are always the best designs.
So at this point in your penmanship career, is it possible for you to write a piece and do it spontaneous, as far as you look at it and say, "Oh, I just missed it"?
Yeah.
You can. I mean, same thing with me in script. I can miss slant angles, and it's important that the novice that this understands that this is not, a genetic inbred ability. There are some advantages to having some natural artistic ability. You see that, but you can do it even if you. I mean, unless you have, in your case, 2 right hands, or in my case, 2 left hands, you can learn to do this. Now, maybe not everybody can do it at the level of Mataraz or you, but people can learn to do this. And I think what's generally missing in the pointed pen world today is there's lots of flourishing going on, but they don't understand the rules of flourishing. Not that you always have to obey the rules, but when you break the symmetry of the master's rules and how they did this stuff, it's really noticeable, right, to the eye of an expert penman.
Right.
And so and I call this spaghetti. And it's perfectly fine if people want to do that, but you have to be able to strip away the spaghetti first and look at the letter forms and start with the letter forms, right, John? Because when you study traditional Cenarian grocer script, and then you sort of branched out to a more, what I call a more Mataraz influenced script. Right. And I want to make one more point about that. I've said this before online. It's interesting because I'm the one who sort of touts the Cenarian approach. However, when I write script, if you look at my script, the Cenarian approach, you pick the pen point up at the baseline, you put it back down, leave a little space in between it, and you make your hairline. I don't do that. I pull my letters, my script the way Mataraz does. My letters don't look like his. John's letter forms look like Mataraz, but he writes them in the Cenarian style where he has an interrupted baseline. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Right. And so I've always thought that was a very interesting contrast there. And you ever do it where you simply pull it around? If you're writing an envelope, let's say?
No, only for reproduction work.
Okay.
If I'm doing something for reproduction and I'm doing it very slowly and carefully, I might let it connect. Because there are people that have taken a piece that I did for them or something and said, it's just beautiful. It's only the problem is some spaces skipping on the inside. So I say, well, that's intentional, and usually that's all they want to hear. And otherwise, I say, if they don't like it, I say, I can connect it for you.
Yeah, exactly. But you could also pull out an exemplar from Louis Baird that shows
I can do that. Right. I could easily do that. And the thing is that leaving that gap allows me, when I make a stroke, to guarantee that nothing is going to be dragged, no ink is going to drag into the thin stroke, because you cut it off and you're starting fresh. So, but I can't do it any other way. It's just automatic. The stroke, each letter is essentially separate.
Let's take it back now to IAMPETH. The interesting thing about going back to this topic of IAMPETH is you've heard John and I mention names. Willis Baird, one of the most proficient scriptwriters that have ever lived. Earl Lupford, author of the first few pages of the Cenarian Manual, and principal, longtime teacher at the Cenarian College, and the mentor of Bill Lilly and many of our other men, Christy Stars as well. He taught Steve Ziller. The interesting thing, the point I want to make about those folks is they were members of IAMPETH. Lupford was a member of IAMPETH. Willis Baird was a member of IAMPETH. We actually have, I actually own an invitation written by Baird in his late 70s in his script on the IAMPETH website as an invitation to the IAMPETH convention, which was then known as IAMPETH. There was no engrosser's name in it, so it was the IAMPETH, the E came later. They added the engrosser to it, and the engrosser is simply that version of a calligrapher or illuminator at that period of time. And so we'll take it back to IAMPETH. You told us when you first became aware of it. What do you see, John, as IAMPETH's role or mission in the world of calligraphic arts and penmanship? What do you see as its role? Is it simply calligraphy, penmanship? Is it history? How do you see it?
I don't know if I have, as far as the penmanship aspect of it goes, as you know, sadly, penmanship is lost out in the
right.
the world today, it seems. But when I started back in even in '94, I had communication with certain calligraphy groups. I didn't actually belong to any for a while, but I knew the people, and I communicated with them, receiving the shows and whatnot. And there was this, like, a little bit of a division there for a while, where this wasn't really considered calligraphy. They considered it more handwriting, penmanship, but it really, script really isn't. Well, the organization has done so much to change that right now, and now it's, you've got all kinds of people from Broadband coming here to learn this art. To me, it's the most beautiful art. I can appreciate Old English.
Yeah, absolutely.
I certainly appreciate it.
And the old masters did that. I mean, not all of them, but most of them did. Dennis and those guys did. Quill pen work. And I agree. So you mentioned how it's changed since you joined in '94. Over 16 years. How do you see what's really changed besides numbers at the convention?
The work, the amount of when I look at the work from the different members, pointed pen work, people that weren't pointed pen people before, and it's just amazing how beautiful the work is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really compared to when I started, but of course we only had 45 members at the first convention, and it stayed that way for a while.
And we're up to this convention. I think we had as many as 235 registered at one point. I think we had about 215. Yeah, great. So you see a greater interest in it now. Like you, when I started, there was a vacuum there. There was nowhere to go. And I think one of the things, from my perspective, IAMPETH has helped us to get disseminated information out there. And so I agree with you. There's been a great influence. We have people now. Now, I'm not saying that IAMPETH was necessarily responsible for this directly. I don't really ask how many. We have a pretty good copper plate artist in Iran. We have people who are doing beautiful work in Europe and the Eastern Bloc, former Eastern Bloc countries, and it really, truly is amazing how influential this. And Brian Walker is teaching Spencerian script, and he's one of probably the best Spencerian penmen out there, along with Mike Salt. And even yourself, you've been working on Spencerian. So it's interesting to see that, especially in England, because that wasn't their form of handwriting. Spencerian script is uniquely, American. But John, I want to ask you the final question I would like to ask you is, if you had a video camera and a time machine, and you could go back and find one of the past master penmen. If you want to mention the second one, you can. But if you had to find one, I pretty much know what your answer is going to be. Who would it be and why?
Well, it would be Mr. Louis Matarazzi, and I'm amazed that there isn't even one photograph of him, not a posed one, but a photograph of him actually working. And it was not that long ago. I guess it was 100 years, but it would be him. I would want to see the speed that he worked at. I would want to see through those strokes, just was his elbow off the table or down, even though he describes it in his book. I'd still like to see it, because I'm a visual person. If I see it, I can do it if I watch it enough times. And again, he's right-handed, so I know how to figure that and work that out. But it would be Louis Matarazzi, and then any of the others would follow there.
One of the things I think that is, important for our membership is to know who these folks were. And that's one of the things I think IAMPETH is really been successful with online and through some other groups as well, is to make sure that, it's great to know about the European history of calligraphy and things like that. That's important. We know that, and the past masters knew it as well. But there are a lot of American pen arts people who never heard of Louis Matarazzi, never heard of C.P. Zaner, and who think that broad pen work only started after, the early 1900s was rediscovered. In fact, W.E. Dennis was cutting his own quills and doing text lettering, beautiful text lettering in the late 1800s. Flickinger, the late 1800s, latter half of the 1800s. So this did exist, and the whole history is not there. So, Louis Matarazzo, it doesn't surprise me, John. I want to close with this. You were very helpful to me when I first came into this. I came to the convention in 1999. And I had no clue what to do with that pen. I mean, I was using it, but I couldn't figure out how to make ink stick on the pen. And I remember just happened to find out, like you did, serendipitously about IAMPETH. And I found out that in 2 weeks was going to be where I was living, in Rochester, New York. And I'll never forget watching you write. Not only was the arm movement something I'd never seen, and still to this day cannot do because I've never worked on it. But I remember watching you write and being totally mystified, not only with the beauty of your script, but how you were able to keep the ink on the pen and write the letters. Because I would try and write a letter, and the ink would come off halfway down a shade, and I just couldn't do it. And I remember asking you, excuse me, how are you doing? You explained to me, gracious enough to explain to me, how to prepare the pen point. But I think the one thing, the hallmark, I think we both take away from IAMPETH is, the graciousness and kindness of the majority of the members of willingness to share. Because if it wasn't for that experience, I don't think I would have progressed any further. And that was really, a seminal moment for me. It was IAMPETH, as I'm sure it was for you. Anyway, listen, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
No, you're welcome.
And if anybody in the audience would like to contact John, remember his beyondwordscript.com. You can contact him through that website. And I would strongly encourage any of our left-handed penmen or aspiring penmen to please contact John if you have any particular questions about, how to sort of progress in this art form. And you're welcome to contact me through, I have the Ornamental Penmanship group as well on Yahoo, as well as Cenarian.com. And, I'm very interested in keeping people interested in this art form in it. Because we've seen way too many people try and come in, they're writing the wrong pen points, the oblique pen holes are not properly adjusted, they get frustrated and they quit. And so a whole series of videos I post, not only of my own instructional material, but also you'll see several videos of John DeCollibus on the IAMPETH website. I strongly encourage you to go there and look. And thank you for your time.